Nuria collapsed beside her mother's coffin, and the sound that came out of her didn't feel human. It was ragged, ripped from deep in her chest, the kind of sob that steals air and leaves the throat burning. Her palms pressed against the polished wood as if the coffin could steady her, as if the shine could hold her up. The chapel smelled of lilies and old varnish. Wax from thin white candles warmed the air, mixing with expensive perfume that didn't belong in a room like this. Stained glass scattered bruised colors over the floor, and every shard of light seemed to land on the wrong people. Nuria's black coat hung on her like it had been borrowed from a harder life. The cuff was frayed, one loose thread brushing her wrist each time her hand shook. Her shoes were scuffed, the heels worn down unevenly, and when she shifted her knees on the stone, the leather whispered against marble. Behind her, silence held for a beat. Not the sacred kind, not the kind grief deserves. It was the silence of an audience waiting for the next line. A glass clinked. Evelyn Ashford stood near the front pew with a champagne flute balanced in her fingers, pale gold bubbles climbing the glass, as if this were a celebration. Her silk dress caught the stained light and turned it into something slick. The perfume around her was sharp, expensive, and deliberate. When she laughed, it bounced off the chapel walls like breaking ice. "Let's be clear," Evelyn said, voice calm and cruel in the same breath. "Her mother died and left her buried in debt. That's her inheritance." Nuria's shoulders tightened. Her fingers dug into the edge of the coffin until the skin over her knuckles went pale. She didn't look up. She couldn't. If she did, she might see the satisfaction on Evelyn's face and lose whatever small control she had left. Evelyn took a slow sip, the rim of the glass tapping softly against her nail. The sound was tiny, but in the chapel it carried. Then Evelyn stepped forward, heels clicking on marble, steady as a metronome. "Imagine spending your whole life poor," she said, smiling at someone behind Nuria, "and leaving your daughter even poorer." A few of the mourners shifted, eyes dropping, hands clasping tighter around programs. The priest in the corner looked like he wanted to fold into his robe. No one spoke. Miranda Ashford, Caleb's sister, leaned against a pew with her phone raised, recording openly. Her grin was bright, hungry, the lens aimed straight at Nuria's bowed head and shaking shoulders as if grief were a show. "This is the saddest funeral I've ever seen," Miranda said, and she didn't bother to lower her voice. Her thumb hovered over the screen, ready to post. "I swear, this is going to blow up." End quote. A ripple of laughter moved through the Ashford cluster, sharp and contained, as if they had practiced it. Gregory, a cousin, chimed in from a few steps back. "She probably thought we'd pay for all this," he said. "Poor people always do." Nuria's breath hitched. Her throat tasted like metal. She kept her gaze locked on her mother's face under the glass, pale and still. The last soft line of her mouth smoothed by death. The flowers around the coffin were arranged with money, not love. White lilies, too perfect, too clean. They looked like they had never been touched by hands that worked. Nuria's pocket pressed against her ribs. Something hard rested there, a small, cold weight she had been holding on to since the moment the hospital called. Her fingers curled toward it without thinking, brushing fabric, feeling the outline through the lining. Cold metal, a tiny glint trapped in darkness. She didn't pull it out. She didn't even breathe around it. She just let it remind her that her mother had always left something behind, even when the world insisted she had nothing. Caleb stood off to the side near the entrance, back close to the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. His suit fit perfectly, but he looked wrong inside it. Shoulders hunched, jaw clenched. His eyes stayed on the floor. When Nuria lifted her head for a fraction of a second, searching for him, He did not meet her gaze. Not once. Evelyn noticed. She always noticed. She stepped closer to the coffin, close enough that Nuria could smell her perfume more clearly, the bright sting of it cutting through lilies. "You know," Evelyn said, voice lowering, turning intimate in the way knives do right before they cut. "Caleb and I have been discussing your situation." Nuria didn't respond. She forced her hands to loosen, forced her breathing to slow, one shaky inhale at a time. Evelyn's smile widened anyway. "It's time for some changes. It's time you moved out of the estate." A few heads turned. A few mouths parted as if someone might object. No one did. "You don't really belong there anymore, do you?" Evelyn continued. "Be realistic. Your mother's gone. You have no income, no real education, no family left." She tilted her head, pretending to consider the question like it was polite conversation. "What exactly are you planning to do now?" Miranda's phone shifted, zooming in. Nuria could hear the tiny electronic whir. She could almost feel the red recording dot burning into her skin. Nuria swallowed. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The chapel lights flickered slightly, a soft buzz from overhead that made everything feel even more unreal. She stared at her mother, at the stillness, at the dignity her mother deserved and was being denied in real time. Evelyn leaned in closer, her whisper somehow louder than the room. "We've found someone more suitable for Caleb. Someone with class. Someone who won't embarrass us." The word embarrass landed like a slap. Nuria's chest tightened so hard she thought it might crack. For a moment, her knees threatened to fold again. The weight of every insult, every dinner-table humiliation, every time she had stood in a room full of people like this and tried to make herself smaller, all of it pressed down at once. Her hand slid along the coffin's edge until her fingertips found a seam in the wood. The surface was cool, smooth, indifferent. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt steadier, not because the coffin helped, but because she needed to give her mother something in return. She needed to give her dignity back, even if it was only through the way she stood. Nuria lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but her face stopped trembling. She looked at Evelyn directly, calm settling over her features like ice forming across water. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, not weak, controlled. "I'm going to bury my mother with the dignity she deserves," Nuria said. Evelyn blinked, confused, as if she had expected pleading, not a sentence with edges. Nuria kept her gaze steady. "And then I'm going to remember every word you just said." A small pause followed, heavy and sharp. Evelyn's smile twitched. "Remember?" she repeated, and the word came out like a scoff. "For what?" Nuria didn't answer. She turned back to the coffin, the movement slow and deliberate, and placed her hand gently on the polished wood, as if it were a promise. Her fingers brushed the inside of her coat pocket again, just once. The cold weight remained, steady, waiting. Behind her, Evelyn's laugh tried to return, but it sounded thinner this time. Miranda's phone stayed raised. Gregory's smirk stayed in place. The Ashfords kept circling, hungry for a break, hungry for tears. But Nuria's posture changed. She rose fully from her knees, shoulders squared, breath finally under control. She did not wipe her face for them. She did not offer them a performance. She stood beside her mother's coffin like a guard. And for the first time in the chapel, the silence didn't belong to them. It belonged to her. The laughter returned in small, jagged pieces, as if the room had decided Nuria's calm was just another joke to chew. Champagne bubbles rose. Phones stayed up. The chapel air thickened with perfume and lilies until it felt like breathing through fabric. Nuria didn't look at the screens. She didn't need to. She could feel the lenses the way a person feels heat from an open oven. She kept her hand on the coffin for one last second, then let it go, fingers peeling away slowly, as if she were leaving her pulse behind. If justice stories are your thing, hit subscribe. We dive in now. Evelyn's heels ticked back toward her flock. The sound was confident, impatient, like a countdown someone else thought they controlled. Miranda shifted to catch Nuria's profile, the angle that would make her grief look smaller, weaker, more usable. Gregory murmured something that got another round of laughter. Nuria turned her head just enough to see Caleb again in the corner of her vision. He stood where he had been, shoulders tight, eyes down. The silence he wore wasn't neutral. It was a choice. She felt it like a hand on her throat, her pocket pressed against her ribs. The paper inside was folded cleanly, edges crisp. Under it, the cold weight of metal rested against her palm when her fingers brushed it. It steadied her the way a railing steadies someone on a bridge, not because it saved her, but because it reminded her she could hold on. They didn't know. They didn't know the Ashford Corporation had been a Hail subsidiary for 12 years. The thought didn't arrive like triumph. It arrived like clarity, like a door shutting softly on a room she would never enter again. Evelyn turned back as if she couldn't resist another bite. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Don't make this dramatic, Nuria," she said, loud enough for the nearest mourners to hear. "This is just practical." Practical. The word was a polished weapon. Nuria's stomach tightened anyway, a reflex. The chapel's light slid over Evelyn's jewelry, over Miranda's glossy phone case, over Gregory's cufflinks that caught the stained glass like stolen color. "I already had the papers drafted," Evelyn added, voice bright. "You'll sign them this week. Caleb will handle it." Caleb's head lifted half an inch. Not to defend her, just enough to feel the weight of his mother's command. He swallowed, eyes flicking toward Nuria, then away again. A few seats back, someone cleared their throat too loudly. The priest's hands clasped tighter around his book. A mourner's program crinkled in someone's grip, paper bending, resisting. Nuria's pulse thudded behind her ears. She could hear it over the low murmurs, over the faint hum of the chapel's air system. She focused on the physical things, the coolness of the marble under her shoes, the seam of her coat brushing her wrist, the slight drag of loose thread, the cold metal in her pocket. Silence is armor. Her mother's words weren't spoken here, but they lived in Nuria's posture, in the way she didn't flinch, in the way she didn't beg. Evelyn stepped closer again, invading the last inch of space like she owned the air. "You should be grateful," she said, softer now, meant only for Nuria. "Most girls like you don't get offered a clean exit." Nuria looked at her without blinking. Evelyn's pupils were sharp, calculating, but something in her gaze faltered, like she'd reached for a familiar lever and found it missing. Nuria didn't raise her voice. She didn't give Evelyn an argument to perform with. "I'm not leaving," she said. It was simple, flat, final. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" "I said," Nuria repeated. The same tone, the same calm. "I'm not leaving." For a moment, the chapel held its breath. Even Miranda's hand paused, her phone hovering as if the frame had stopped moving. Evelyn's smile reassembled itself, tighter this time. "You think you have a choice," she said, and her laugh tried to cover the edge in her voice. "That's adorable." Miranda let out a little gasp, delighted, as if she'd just been given a better scene. She angled the camera lower to catch Nuria's hands, probably hoping for shaking fingers. Gregory leaned in, hungry for impact. Nuria gave them nothing. She turned back toward the coffin, eyes dropping, not in defeat but in restraint. She placed her fingertips against the polished wood again, gentle as a goodbye. The words she spoke were for her mother, too quiet for anyone else to steal. Her lips barely moved. Evelyn mistook the hush for surrender. She straightened, shoulders rolling back like a queen returning to her throne. "Fine," she said, louder, for the room. "Have your moment. We all know what comes next." It not so. A few nervous laughs flickered near the back. The kind of laughter people use to prove they belong. The funeral director approached with the careful expression of someone trying to survive a storm without getting struck. He nodded once, almost apologetic, and motioned toward the pallbearers. The men moved in, their shoes scuffed softly across the stone. Hands slid under the coffin with practiced precision. There was a small creak of wood as weight shifted. Nuria stepped back. The space beside her felt abruptly empty, like a limb had been removed. She watched the coffin lift, watched her mother's nameplate catch a shard of stained light. Miranda's phone rose higher. Evelyn's champagne glass tilted. A lazy toast. Gregory muttered, "About time." Nuria's fingers curled around the edge of her coat, the folded letter pressed against her ribs. The metal in her pocket chilled her palm, anchoring her in the only thing that mattered now: control. As the coffin began to move down the aisle, Nuria followed at a measured pace. The chapel doors ahead glowed with daylight, bright enough to sting. The air near the exit tasted different, less floral, more real. Outside, she could already hear faint traffic, distant horns, the world moving on without permission. Behind her, Evelyn's voice floated, light and venomous. "We'll be done with this by afternoon." Nuria didn't turn. She kept walking, and as the coffin crossed into the sunlight, the shadows of stained glass slid off the wood like a veil being lifted, and Nuria felt the shift inside her settle into something steady. Tomorrow, they would sit in a room that smelled of leather and power and pretend it belonged to them. Tomorrow, a number would be spoken that would steal their breath. Tomorrow, the silence they mocked would finally speak back. The cemetery sat on the edge of the city like an afterthought, a thin stretch of grass and stone pressed between a busy road and a line of quiet trees. Wind moved through the branches with a dry whisper, and every gust carried the scent of damp soil up into the air, raw and honest. Nuria stood at the lip of the grave while the coffin sank on its straps, inch by inch, the wood disappearing into darkness. A pulley groaned. The ropes rubbed, a soft rasp against metal. When the coffin settled, the sound was final in a way her body still refused to accept. Behind her, the Ashfords shifted in their expensive coats, as if the cold were an insult. Evelyn's perfume reached Nuria even out here, sharp and bright against the wet earth. It didn't belong under this sky. The priest spoke, voice flat, words falling like dry leaves. Nuria caught fragments and let the rest pass. Her attention stayed on small things: a bead of water clinging to a rose petal, the grit of sand under her shoe, the way her breath turned white for a second and vanished. Miranda's phone was up again, angled to catch the grave, the coffin, Nuria's profile. The screen glowed in daylight. Every time Miranda adjusted her grip, the camera made a tiny focus sound, a soft electronic tick that stabbed at the quiet. "How much longer is this going to take?" Miranda muttered. Her heels dug into the grass. "I have a spa appointment at 4. I was no tour." Gregory didn't even look up from his phone. "Just let her have her moment," he said, bored. "She'll be gone soon anyway." Evelyn stood with her arms folded, watching Nuria like she was watching a slow inconvenience. Her lips curved, satisfied, as if the grave were proof she'd already won. Nuria kept her face forward. Her hands were still, clasped lightly at her waist, fingers tucked into her sleeves to keep them from shaking. The wind slipped into her coat and pressed the fabric against the folded paper in her pocket. The corner of the envelope edged against her ribs. A shovel scraped. Someone cleared their throat. The cemetery's silence didn't feel sacred. It felt rented. When the priest nodded to the attendants, the first shovel of dirt hit wood below with a dull, hollow thump. Another followed, then another. Each sound landed in Nuria's chest like a slow drum. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Impatient. Well, she said. Too loud for where they were. At least this part is finally happening. The sentence was meant to be heard. Meant to bruise. Miranda's laugh came quick, small, eager. Nuria didn't move. She watched the soil darken as it fell, watched it slide into the shape of a mound, watched it cover what was left to see. Then the wind shifted. Her coat lifted slightly, the hem fluttering, and for a split second, the folded letter in her pocket pressed outward, the edge visible beneath the fabric. A corner peeked out, bright against black cloth. And there it was, clean and sharp, an ink stamp catching daylight. Harrison and Associates. 8:14 in the morning. The stamp was so ordinary it felt brutal. A time, a place, a confirmation that something had already been set in motion while they were still laughing. The gust died as quickly as it came. Her coat settled back against her body. The envelope disappeared again, hidden, but the moment stayed exposed inside her, like a match struck and cupped in a palm. Evelyn didn't see it. Miranda didn't see it. Gregory didn't see it. They were too busy being themselves. Nuria reached into her pocket without looking, not to pull anything out, just to touch the paper and the cold metal beneath it. The metal bit lightly into her fingertip through the lining, solid, real. Her breath steadied. When the last words were spoken, people began to drift the way crowds do after a show. Shoes crushed wet grass. Coats rustled. Someone's car alarm chirped once in the distance and then stopped. Evelyn stepped closer, heels sinking slightly into soft ground. Well, she said again, like she needed the world to echo her, that's finally over. She turned to Caleb with the expectation of agreement, of a man falling into line. Caleb stood a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders pulled in tight. His gaze was fixed somewhere near the grave, but not on it. Not really. He looked drained, like the day had scraped him hollow. He didn't answer his mother. Miranda rolled her eyes. Now we can get back to normal life, she said, twirling her phone between her fingers. Nuria will be gone by the end of the week, and we can move forward with new arrangements. Gregory snorted. I give her 2 days before she's begging to stay. Where else is she going to go? The words were tossed out like crumbs for birds. They expected them to land, expected Nuria to react, expected tears or anger or anything they could use. Nuria didn't give them that. She turned slowly, the movement controlled, and let her eyes sweep across them one by one. Evelyn's confident mouth, Miranda's gleaming screen, Gregory's smirk, Caleb's avoidance. Then Nuria smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't warm. It didn't reach her eyes. It was a small, quiet curve of her lips that lived for only a second, like a blade flashing and then vanishing. Evelyn's brows pulled together. The expression on her face didn't fit the moment. Confusion cracked the polished surface of her certainty. What? Evelyn said, voice sharper than she meant. Is so funny? Nuria didn't answer. She slid the envelope deeper into her pocket with 2 fingers, making sure the stamped corner was tucked away. The paper whispered against fabric. The metal in her palm cooled her skin. Then she walked, not fast, not fleeing, measured steps through wet grass toward the waiting car. The ground gave slightly under her shoes. A crow called once from a tree line, harsh and brief. Behind her, she heard a scoff, a huff of irritation. the soft click of Miranda resuming her recording, as if the scene had to continue without consent. Nuria reached the car door and rested her hand on the handle. The metal was cold, slick against her palm. She paused for a beat, just long enough to feel the wind press at her coat again, just long enough to let the stamp in her pocket burn in her mind. Tomorrow, Evelyn's voice drifted after her, careless. Don't forget, Nuria. You still have papers to sign. Nuria opened the door, slid into the seat. The window muted the world. The cemetery fell back into distance, into small shapes and moving mouths. Nuria stared ahead as the engine turned over, low and steady. When she pulled away, she didn't look back at the grave. She didn't look back at them either. And the smile she'd given them stayed behind like a warning they were too arrogant to understand. The conference room at Harrison and Associates was built to make people feel small, a long mahogany table stretched beneath a row of recessed lights, the wood so polished it held faint reflections like water. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in clean lines and distant haze. The air smelled of leather chairs, paper, and expensive wood polish, sharp enough to sting if you breathed too deep. Outside the glass, traffic moved like a slow ribbon. Inside, time felt pinned. Evelyn Ashford arrived first, 15 minutes early, which was unusual for her. She swept through the doorway with purpose, designer bag swinging from her forearm, heels clicking hard against the floor in a rhythm that demanded attention. The receptionist tried to guide her to a seat, but Evelyn didn't ask where she belonged. She chose the chair at the head of the table. The leather sighed when she sat, a soft exhale that sounded like permission. Evelyn folded her hands, chin lifted, eyes already claiming the room. Caleb followed a step behind her, shoulders tense as if the suit jacket didn't fit right. He looked like he hadn't slept. A faint shadow sat under his eyes. His jaw worked once, like he was grinding down words he didn't know how to say. He took the seat beside his mother, without looking up. Miranda came in next, phone in hand, thumb moving. The screen lit her face in a cool glow. She didn't greet anyone. She slid into a chair, legs crossed, and muttered, "This better not take long. I've got lunch." Gregory arrived last, wide smile, loose confidence. He dropped into his chair and stretched his legs under the table like he owned the place too. "So," he said, voice low but loud enough to be heard, "what are we thinking? A few grand? Maybe some jewelry worth pawning?" Evelyn shot him a look that was half warning, half agreement. "Show some respect," she said, but her lips curved anyway. "We're here for business." The word business landed heavy in the quiet room. It made the space feel colder. Nuria arrived exactly on time. The receptionist opened the door for her, and she stepped in without hesitating. Coat buttoned, hair neat, expression calm and unreadable. No makeup beyond what made her look awake. No jewelry trying to prove anything. Just clean lines and stillness. The moment she entered, the room's noise thinned. Miranda's thumb paused for half a second. Gregory's grin adjusted, flickering like a bad signal. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Her gaze traveled over Nuria the way it always did, looking for something to pick at. A loose thread, a cheap seam, a sign of weakness. Nuria gave her nothing. Nuria chose a seat at the far end of the table, opposite Evelyn, as distant as the room allowed. The leather was cool beneath her palms when she rested her hands on her lap. She could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation and the distant, occasional ding of an elevator somewhere in the hallway outside. Caleb glanced up when she sat. His eyes met her for a fraction of a second, then dropped again, like contact was a punishment. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "I'm surprised you came," she said, tone smooth. "Given everything." Nuria didn't respond. Her gaze went to the empty place at the center of the table, where a folder would soon land, where words would turn into weapons. A few minutes passed in clipped silence. The clock on the wall made a faint, disciplined tick. Someone shifted in their seat. Paper rustled somewhere outside in the corridor. Then the door opened. Mr. Harrison walked in with quiet authority, late 50s, silver hair combed back, glasses perched low. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick folder in the other. The folder looked heavy enough to hurt if dropped. The briefcase gave a soft creak when he set it down, like old leather waking up. "Good morning," he said, voice even. Professional. He didn't smile. He didn't perform. Evelyn leaned forward immediately, elbows near the table edge. "Let's get to it, Mr. Harrison," she said, as if she were chairing the meeting. "We all have schedules." Mr. Harrison looked at her briefly, neutral, then placed the folder at the center of the table. The impact was quiet but final, paper and weight meeting wood with a muted thump. Nuria's attention sharpened at the sound. Her fingers curled once, then relaxed. She didn't reach for anything. She stayed still. Mr. Harrison opened the folder. Paper whispered as he separated sections, the sound crisp in the room. He slid out a document and adjusted his glasses. "I am here today," he said, "to execute the last will and testament of Mrs. Helena Hail." Evelyn's lips curled. She glanced toward Nuria, as if sharing a private joke with the air. "I'm sure this won't take long," she said. The poor woman didn't have much to leave behind. Mr. Harrison didn't react. He turned one page. The paper edge made a soft, sharp flick. "As per her explicit instructions," he continued, "this reading will cover the distribution of all assets, properties, and holdings under her name and associated entities." Gregory shifted forward in his chair, interest sharpening greed into focus. Miranda set her phone face down on the table like she was bored, but her fingers still hovered near it, ready. Evelyn clasped her hands, satisfied. "Finally," she murmured. Mr. Harrison paused just long enough to let the room settle, then spoke again. Steady. "Mrs. Hale's estate is extensive," he said. "It includes multiple properties, corporate holdings, medical facilities, and financial assets." Evelyn's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Not fully broken, just interrupted. Caleb's head lifted slightly, reflexive. Miranda's eyes flicked up. Mr. Harrison's voice didn't change when he delivered the number, as if it were just another line of text, not a grenade. "The total estimated value," he said, "as of the most recent audit, is approximately $103 billion. The word billion didn't echo. Gregory shot upright, chair legs scraping the floor with a harsh squeal. "What?" Miranda's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table, the sound sharp and stupidly loud. Her mouth hung open. Caleb's face drained of color so fast it looked like the room's light had shifted. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Evelyn stared at Mr. Harrison as if she'd misheard him, as if language itself had betrayed her. The confidence in her posture cracked. Her fingers tightened on each other until her knuckles whitened. "That's impossible," Evelyn said, the words snapping out too quickly. "There must be a mistake. Helena Hale was a cleaning woman. She sold food on street corners. She lived in a one-room apartment." Mr. Harrison met her gaze calmly. His expression didn't soften. "Mrs. Hale was many things, Mrs. Ashford," he said, "but being poor was not one of them." Nuria sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. Her heartbeat was loud in her own ears, but her face gave nothing away. The leather chair held her like a verdict. Evelyn's breath hitched, sharp. "Where did it come from?" she demanded. "How could she?" Strategic investment, Mr. Harrison said simply, and careful structure. He turned the page again. Paper whispered. The sound was suddenly terrifying. And now, he said, voice level, we move to the distribution of assets. The Ashfords leaned forward without meaning to, pulled by instinct, by greed, by the desperate need to make the number belong to them. Mr. Harrison's eyes dropped to the document in his hand. He read the next line like a blade, sliding free. To my daughter, he said, Nuria Hail, I leave the entirety of my estate. The sentence landed softly. The reaction did not. For a moment, the room forgot how to move. Even the ventilation hum seemed to thin. Nuria felt the air tighten against her skin, as if the building itself had leaned in to listen. Mr. Harrison continued, voice level, eyes on the page. This includes all shares, properties, subsidiaries, and holdings under the Hail Medical Foundation and its associated entities. Full ownership. No conditions. No restrictions. Number. Silence held for a beat too long. Then, chairs scraped. Evelyn stood so fast, the leather snapped back with a harsh squeak. The polished table caught a distorted reflection of her face, suddenly red and sharp. That is outrageous, she said. Words clipped like she was cutting paper. She's married to my son. She's part of this family. That means, with all due respect, Mr. Harrison said, without raising his voice, that is not how inheritance works. Evelyn's eyes flashed. We will contest it. We'll take this to court. There is no way a woman like Helena Hale built that kind of wealth legally. Fraud. Manipulation. Someone used her name. Gregory's earlier grin was gone. He stared at the document stack, as if it might rearrange itself into something he could swallow. Miranda's hands hovered over her fallen phone, not picking it up yet. Like touching it would make this real. Caleb sat frozen, staring at Nuria now, as if the distance across the table had turned into a cliff. His throat moved once. He looked like he wanted to speak, and like he couldn't afford to. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. He slid another document out of the folder with precise fingers. Paper whispered across wood. You are welcome to pursue legal action, he said. However, Mrs. Hale anticipated that possibility. She included contingency clauses. Evelyn's mouth tightened. Contingency clauses, she repeated, like the phrase itself was an insult. Mr. Harrison placed the document flat and turned it slightly so it faced the group, but he didn't invite them to touch it. In the event that any party attempts to contest the will or challenge the legitimacy of the estate, he read, all personal assets tied to employment within the Hale Medical Foundation and its subsidiaries will be immediately forfeited. This includes salaries, benefits, stock options, and severance packages. Miranda's breath came out in a small, sharp laugh that died halfway. Wait, employment? She said. What does that have to do with us? Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Yes. What does the Hale Medical Foundation have to do with the Ashfords? Mr. Harrison lifted his gaze, calm as a surgeon. Mrs. Ashford, he said, are you familiar with the Ashford Corporation? Evelyn's chin lifted. Of course. It's our family company. We built it. Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase. The leather creaked. He pulled out a neat stack of papers and laid them across the table in measured lines, like cards in a game where the ending was already decided. Corporate filings, acquisition agreements, stock transfer records, employment contracts. At the top of each page, the same name sat in bold print. Hale Medical Foundation. The room tilted. Caleb leaned forward, eyes scanning, and Nuria saw something break in him as he read. Miranda finally picked up her phone. Not to film, just to hold it like a lifeline. Her fingers trembled. Gregory's face went slack. The smugness drained clean, leaving only fear. Evelyn stared, blinking too fast. This, this is impossible, she whispered. We would have known. 12 years ago. Mr. Harrison said, voice calm and methodical. The Ashford Corporation was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mrs. Hail acquired it through a holding company. She restructured the debt. She kept operations stable. She allowed the Ashford family to continue running it under the belief it remained theirs. He paused. The quiet in the room turned heavy. She did that, he continued, because she wanted her daughter protected from people who treat power like a weapon. Evelyn's gaze snapped to Nuria as if she'd been slapped. You knew, she said, the words tasting like metal. You knew, and you said nothing. Nuria met her eyes without blinking. The leather chair under her didn't move. Her hands remained folded in her lap. Her voice was quiet when it came, controlled enough to hurt. I found out the day my mother died. Evelyn's shoulders tightened. And you let us. Her voice rose, rough with panic. You let us humiliate ourselves. You let my daughter record. Yes, Nuria said, still quiet. I did. The words sat in the air, like a locked door. Evelyn's face shifted, rage searching for a shape. Her mouth opened, and Mr. Harrison's tone changed for the first time. Not louder, sharper. Mrs. Ashford, he said, I would advise you to choose your next words carefully. Abada's Evelyn froze mid-breath. Any further harassment, Mr. Harrison continued, could be interpreted as workplace misconduct under the Foundation's policies. That carries consequences. Immediate ones. The concept of consequences looked unfamiliar on Evelyn's face. Like a language she had never been forced to learn. Mr. Harrison turned slightly toward Nuria. Hail, he said. As the sole owner of the Hail Medical Foundation and all subsidiaries, you now have full authority over corporate strategy and employment decisions. Do you have any immediate instructions? The question didn't sound dramatic. It sounded procedural, which made it worse. Nuria looked across the table at the Ashfords. Evelyn's champagne confidence had curdled into disbelief. Miranda's eyes were wet, not from grief, from fear of losing comfort. Gregory's leg bounced under the table, a frantic rhythm he couldn't control. Caleb stared at Nuria like she was a stranger wearing his life. Nuria let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel it. The windows behind Mr. Harrison held the city in bright, indifferent daylight. Somewhere outside, a siren rose and fell. The room smelled of polished wood and sweat now, the sharp edge of panic cutting through everything expensive. Then Nuria smiled. Small, calm, devastating. Not yet, she said, softly. Evelyn flinched as if the words had touched her skin. Mr. Harrison nodded once, as if he'd expected it. He began gathering the documents into a neat stack again. Paper slid across wood with a controlled whisper, the sound of order returning. Evelyn's hands gripped the table edge. You can't do this, she said, but the sentence came out weak, more prayer than threat. Nuria didn't answer. She didn't need to. Across the table, Caleb's shoulders sagged, and for the first time it looked like he understood that silence wasn't always weakness. Sometimes it was the moment right before the blade moves. Nuria sat still, eyes steady, while the Ashfords searched for words and found none. And in that quiet, the power finally had a sound. The first headline hit before Nuria reached the elevator. A notification pinged somewhere in the hallway, then another, then a rapid series of soft chimes as phones in waiting rooms and reception desks lit up. Through the glass wall outside the conference suite, she saw two junior associates huddled over a screen, mouths parted, eyes wide. The story was already escaping its cage. Billionaire cleaning woman, hidden empire, family betrayal. Nuria kept walking. Mr. Harrison matched her pace, briefcase in hand, footsteps muted by carpet. The corridor smelled faintly of copier toner and citrus cleaner. At the elevator, the doors opened with a smooth chime. A mirrored panel reflected Nuria's face back at her calm, pale, controlled, while her pulse kept hitting the same spot beneath her ribs. The doors slid shut. A soft thud. The elevator began its descent with a low, steady hum. Evelyn's voice from the conference room still clung to the back of Nuria's mind, all sharp edges and entitlement. Contest it. Take it to court, as if the law were a concierge. The hum shifted. The elevator dinged again, and the doors opened onto the lobby. Outside, a small crowd had already gathered across the street, 2 cameras on tripods, a reporter in a windbreaker, a man with a handheld mic, practicing his posture like a prayer. Flashing lights bounced off the building's glass doors. White bursts that made the marble floor inside blink. Mr. Harrison angled his body slightly, guiding Nuria away from the front entrance and toward a side exit. A security guard held the door open, eyes flicking between Nuria and the cameras like he was trying not to stare. As soon as the door cracked, sound rushed in. Traffic, voices, a shouted question that turned into 3. Mrs. Hale, did you know? Are you firing the Ashfords? Is the will real? Nuria didn't break stride. The cold outside air hit her cheeks and carried the smell of exhaust and wet pavement. She slid into the waiting car, leather seat cool under her palms. The door shut with a clean click that cut the noise in half. The car pulled away. Tires hissed over the street. The city kept moving, like it hadn't just watched a world flip. By the time Nuria reached the Hale Medical Foundation headquarters, the lobby televisions were already replaying the story in looping segments. A suited anchor spoke over graphics. The screen showed a blurred photo of her at the funeral, head bowed, as if grief were her brand. The elevator to the top floors moved faster than it should have for how heavy the day felt. On the 42nd floor, the doors opened into quiet. Her mother's office, now hers, was a corner space with clean lines and too much light. The windows framed the skyline like a sharp-edged painting. The air smelled new, unused, like a room that had been waiting for someone to claim it. A faint server hum lived inside the walls. Somewhere, a vent exhaled cool air in a steady rhythm. Nuria crossed to the desk and set her hand on its surface. The wood was smooth, cool, expensive. It felt unreal beneath her skin. Mr. Harrison placed his briefcase on a side table. The latch snapped open with a crisp, metallic click. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk toward her. "They're going to move quickly," he said. Nuria didn't sit yet. "Evelyn won't accept it," she said, voice low. Mr. Harrison's expression stayed neutral. "No, she'll try to make the law bend to her grief." He opened the folder. Paper rustled. Likely angles. Fraud, undue influence, mental incapacity. "They'll argue your mother couldn't possibly have built structures this complex." Nuria's hand tightened once on the desk edge. The glass of the window was cool against her knuckles when she leaned closer. "And our response?" Mr. Harrison slid another stack forward. "Evidence," he said simply. "Your mother documented everything." He laid it out in clean sections, as if order itself could be weaponized. Bank records, with dates and small deposits that grew over decades. Notarized corporate filings with signatures that matched across years. Acquisition agreements with ink stamps and witness lines. A digital audit summary printed and bound, each page numbered. On the top sheet, a timestamp glared in bold 9:12 am. as if time itself had signed. Nuria stared at the stamp longer than she meant to. Numbers. Proof. The quiet spine of reality. "They can still file," she said. "They will," Mr. Harrison replied. He reached into the briefcase again and removed a thinner document, one page, heavy in its simplicity. "And when they do, a clause activates automatically, is noted." He placed it flat on the desk and tapped the bottom line with one finger. The tap made a soft, dull sound against wood. "Every Ashford on payroll," he said, "has an employment contract tied to the Foundation's subsidiaries. There's language embedded in those contracts. Your mother added it years ago. If any employee initiates legal action against the Foundation or its primary beneficiary, benefits are suspended pending outcome." Nuria's breath slowed. Mr. Harrison nodded once. "Salaries, dividends, stock options, company accounts, country club reimbursements, vehicle leases." He said it like a list, not a punishment. "It isn't revenge, it's risk management." Nuria finally sat. The chair whispered under her weight. The skyline beyond the glass looked untouchable and indifferent. "How long before it hurts them?" she asked. Mr. Harrison didn't hesitate. "Given their burn rate?" He flipped a page. The paper made a crisp snap. 6 weeks. Maybe less. Nuria's gaze drifted to a framed photo on the shelf. One of the Foundation's older buildings, taken at dawn, windows lit, the world still asleep. Her mother had built things quietly. She had built traps quietly, too. A phone on the desk vibrated, a low buzzing against wood. Nuria didn't pick it up. She watched it tremble itself still. Mr. Harrison's own phone buzzed next. He glanced at the screen, then held it out so Nuria could see a single line. "Filed." The message was short. The impact wasn't. Nuria felt something settle in her chest, not fear, not surprise, just the click of a mechanism engaging. Outside her office, down the corridor, the elevator dinged faintly. Somewhere below, printers began to run, a muted whir like distant rain. Mr. Harrison slid a new document across the desk. An internal notice, already drafted, already formatted, already waiting for the moment. Suspension of benefits pending litigation. There were signature lines at the bottom, a date field, a time field, chain of custody, neat and unavoidable. Nuria picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. She signed once, clean and controlled. The ink dried fast under the office's cool air. Mr. Harrison stamped the document with a firm press. The stamp hit paper with a blunt thump, red ink blooming in a perfect rectangle. Nuria watched the imprint settle. A small sound. A big shift. "They wanted court," Mr. Harrison said, closing the folder with a soft finality. "Now they have it." Nuria looked out at the city again. The sun caught the windows of distant buildings, turning them briefly into blades. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The Ashfords had made their move, and the first consequence had already begun. Quiet, procedural, irreversible. The first thing that collapsed wasn't pride. It was convenience. 3 days after the filing, Nuria's assistant slid a slim folder onto her desk. The paper smelled faintly of fresh toner, warm from the printer. The top page was stamped and dated, a clean block of ink that made everything official. Benefits suspension, effective immediately. Nuria didn't react. She traced the edge of the page with her thumb, feeling the slight ridge where the stamp had bitten into paper. Outside her window, the city moved in bright, indifferent sunlight. Inside, the Foundation's offices stayed quiet, only the soft hum of servers in the wall, the faint ding of an elevator, the occasional beep of a badge reader down the corridor. Mr. Harrison stepped in a moment later, coat still on. as if he hadn't bothered to sit anywhere else in the building. He set his briefcase down and opened it with a crisp click. "They're already calling payroll," he said. Nuria looked up. "Which one? Which one?" A small pause. "All of them," Mr. Harrison replied. "Evelyn first." And Nuria's phone buzzed once on the desk. She didn't pick it up. The vibration died, leaving the room too still again. By the end of the week, the Ashfords' world began to show seams. A country club email leaked online membership lapsed for non-payment, shared and reshared, with a cruel little caption about karma. A luxury car was repossessed outside a boutique hotel. The tow truck's hydraulic whine caught on someone's shaky video. The clip went viral because the driver's side window was down and Miranda's voice was unmistakable, shrill and panicked, calling the man disgusting, while he kept repeating the same sentence like a metronome. "Ma'am, the account is frozen." It played on loop across social feeds, the audio tinny and unforgiving. A week later, Nuria's security director left a short note in her inbox. Asterisk, asterisk, unauthorized entry attempt, Ashford estate, asterisk, asterisk. The message included a timestamp and a grainy still from a gate camera. Evelyn's silhouette, framed in headlights, arms raised as if yelling at the intercom. The gate light blinked red in the image. A small dot of refusal. Nuria stared at the still, longer than she meant to. The camera had caught more than Evelyn's shape. It had caught the posture of someone who had never been told no. If you're still watching, stay with it. This is where the mask starts slipping. 2 weeks in, the Ashfords stopped being a family and started being invoices. A spreadsheet arrived on Nuria's desk each morning with neatly labeled columns: asterisk, asterisk, leases, reimbursements, corporate cards, asterisk, asterisk. The numbers were sterile. The consequences were not. Miranda's name showed next to a cancelled payment for a penthouse rental. Gregory's name showed next to a blocked transaction at a watch dealer. Caleb's name appeared under a healthcare premium lapse. The only line that made Nuria's jaw tighten, because it wasn't luxury. It was basic coverage, the quiet kind of safety net that disappears first when the wrong people pull. Mr. Harrison called once in the late afternoon. The line crackled faintly, like the air between them had static. "Evelyn hired Whitmore," he said. Nuria's fingers paused over the edge of her desk. The wood was cool beneath her nails. "The expensive one?" she asked. "Yes," Mr. Harrison said. 15,000 for the consultation. Nuria pictured Evelyn paying that fee with a clenched jaw and a straight spine, as if money still obeyed her. She pictured her walking into a glass office and believing arrogance could be billed as strategy. "And?" Nuria asked. Mr. Harrison exhaled softly. Whitmore told her, "It's airtight." Nuria didn't smile. Her throat felt tight anyway, like she'd swallowed something sharp. The third week was when the social circle went quiet. It started with small things. Invitations that stopped coming, group chats that went dormant, people who used to answer on the first ring, suddenly missing calls. Then it turned visible. A charity board posted a public update removing Evelyn as honorary chair. The announcement used gentle language restructuring, alignment, integrity, but the comments underneath weren't gentle at all. Someone posted the funeral clip again. Someone else replied with a laughing emoji. Someone wrote, asterisk, asterisk. You mocked a dead woman and got fired by her daughter. Asterisk, asterisk. Nuria watched the thread once, then closed it. The glow of the screen lingered on her fingertips like heat. At 4 weeks, the Ashfords began to look different in the photos. Paparazzi caught Caleb leaving a strip mall storefront in plain clothes, shoulders hunched, carrying a cardboard box like he didn't know what to do with his hands. They caught Miranda outside a bank, face shiny with sweat, speaking too close to a security guard. They caught Gregory ducking into the back seat of a rideshare, head down, as if hiding from the camera could undo what the internet had already decided. Evelyn held on the longest. She always would. But the fifth week carved the first real crack. An assistant from downstairs called Nuria's office with a hesitant voice. "Mrs. Hail," she said, "there's someone here." Our eternal loaded. Nuria didn't need the name. She could hear it in the pause. "Send her up," Nuria said. The elevator dinged outside her door a few minutes later. The sound was bright, almost cheerful, and it didn't match the mood that followed it. Evelyn walked into Nuria's office like she expected the room to bend around her. But the heel click was softer now, not because she tried to be quiet, because her steps didn't have the same certainty. Her hair wasn't styled the way it used to be. Her lipstick looked rushed. The expensive coat on her shoulders sat wrong, wrinkled at the elbows as if she'd slept in it. She stopped just inside the doorway and stared at the skyline behind Nuria like it was something she'd been denied unfairly. Nuria remained behind her desk. The air conditioner breathed cool air into the silence. Somewhere, a printer whirred once and stopped. Evelyn's eyes landed on Nuria. The contempt was still there, but it had to share space now with something else: fear, maybe, or the shock of realizing the floor can drop out from under anyone. "I want to talk," Evelyn said. Nuria's voice stayed level. "Then talk." Evelyn swallowed. Her throat moved hard. For a second, she looked like she might say something vicious out of habit, like reaching for a familiar weapon. Then she hesitated, as if she'd finally noticed the blade could cut back. "I think we can settle this," Evelyn said. And the word "settle" sounded like a bargain she didn't know how to price anymore. Nuria didn't move. She watched Evelyn's hands, how they hovered near her bag strap, how the fingers flexed and released like they were trying to remember what control feels like. "Drop the claws," Evelyn continued, faster now. "Reinstate our positions. We go back to how it was. No one has to lose anything." Nuria tilted her head slightly, not mocking, measuring. "And what do I get?" she asked. Evelyn blinked, as if the question insulted her. "You keep everything," she said. "You already won." The word "won" sat ugly in the room, like Evelyn couldn't decide if it was an accusation or an admission. Nuria leaned back in her chair. The leather held her steady. The skyline behind her stayed bright and unreachable. "You're right," Nuria said quietly. "I did." Evelyn's face tightened. "Then why are you doing this?" Nuria looked at her for a long moment. The hum in the walls sounded louder, almost like a heartbeat. "Because you called my mother nothing," Nuria said, calm enough to hurt. "And you meant it." Evelyn's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes flicked once toward the door, as if she'd suddenly remembered she could leave. But leaving wouldn't fix anything. Outside the glass, the city kept moving. Inside, Evelyn Ashford stood in front of a desk she would never own, trying to negotiate with a woman she had spent years treating like air. And Nuria finally understood the simplest truth of power. It doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. The courthouse smelled like old stone and recycled air, a mix of dust, paper, and something faintly metallic. Security trays clattered at the entrance. A guard's handheld scanner beeped with mechanical impatience. Cameras waited outside like hungry insects, their red tally lights blinking in the winter sun. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall with notebooks open, pens poised. A few people held phones low in their laps, screens dimmed but ready. The benches creaked as bodies shifted. whispers traveling in thin waves until the bailiff's voice cut through. All rise. The judge entered with a measured stride and took her seat, face unreadable. The gavel struck once, sharp, controlled. The sound bounced off wood and stone and landed in everyone's chest. Nuria sat at the right table with Mr. Harrison beside her. She wore a simple black suit, clean lines, no shine. Her hands rested together, still. The only movement was the slow rise and fall of her breath. Across the aisle, the Ashfords sat with their lawyer, Whitmore, clustered like a defensive wall that couldn't stop the ground from moving. Evelyn's posture was rigid, shoulders squared too hard, jaw tight. Caleb sat beside her with his gaze fixed on the table edge, knuckles pale. Miranda's mascara had been repaired, but her eyes looked swollen. Gregory tried to slouch into boredom and failed. His leg bounced in a frantic rhythm under the table. Whitmore stood when called, smoothing his suit jacket with practiced confidence. His voice carried easily, trained for rooms like this. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is fundamentally about deception. The plaintiff contends that Helena Hail could not have created a financial structure of this scale without undue influence, fraud, or manipulation by third parties. The court must investigate whether he spoke smoothly, but the words landed wrong. They weren't arguments. They were assumptions disguised as law. Nuria watched him without blinking. The courtroom lights made a thin sheen on the table's surface. Somewhere behind her, a camera shutter clicked softly, then stopped. The judge turned her gaze toward Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison stood slowly, not theatrical, not rushed. The chair legs made a controlled scrape against the floor. He walked to the center aisle with a thick binder in both hands, the kind of weight that comes from decades of paper and patience. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff's case rests on a single belief that because Mrs. Hale was unseen by people like them, she must have been incapable, is too." He set the binder on the evidence table. The thump was dull but decisive. He opened it. Pages fanned with a soft rush of air. Mrs. Hale documented every financial decision for over 3 decades, he continued. Notarized filings, bank statements, acquisition agreements, witnessed signatures, audits. He passed a stack to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it to the judge with careful hands, as if the paper could cut. Whitmore's confidence tightened into a thinner shape, but he held his posture. Mr. Harrison turned another page and held up a sheet long enough for the courtroom to see the header. A time and date stamp sat in the corner, ink dark and sharp. Echo. A courtroom assistant projected a close-up on the screen. The stamp was clear, a digital audit log, timed to the minute. Proof that the structure existed long before anyone claimed it appeared overnight. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly as she read. The room held its breath. Mr. Harrison let the quiet settle. Then he nodded once toward the clerk's table. A small cart rolled forward, laptop, projector, cables neatly coiled. The wheels squeaked softly on the tile. The projector fan hummed as it warmed up. A steady mechanical breath. Whitmore stiffened. "Your Honor," he began, "we object." The judge lifted one hand. "You brought a claim of fraud. You will sit and hear evidence." Mr. Harrison placed a small evidence bag on the table. The clear plastic crinkled. Inside was a USB drive, sealed with a red strip and a signed label. He held it up. The overhead lights caught the seal's glossy surface. "Chain of custody," he said, voice calm. "Sealed by my office. Logged at 10:46 a.m. Delivered to court security at 8:02 a.m. Today." He handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff examined the seal, nodded, then passed it to the clerk. The clerk logged it, pen scratching paper in short strokes. The judge watched the process, eyes steady. Mr. Harrison plugged the USB into the court system. The port made a soft click. The laptop screen flickered. The projector beam brightened, casting a pale rectangle across the front wall. The first video file appeared with a date label. Mr. Harrison pressed play. The room filled with the grainy interior of a dining room. A timestamp glowed in the corner. Evelyn's voice came through the speakers, sharp and unmistakable. "We need to get rid of her." A ripple moved through the courtroom intake of breath. A stifled sound. A pen dropped somewhere in the back. The judge's gaze sharpened. On screen, Evelyn leaned over a table scattered with papers, her face hard. Caleb's younger voice answered, hesitant. Evelyn cut him off, crisp and cold. "She's a mistake. And mistakes can be corrected." On 10. Caleb sat at the plaintiff's table, like his body wanted to fold in on itself. His fingers curled into his palm until his skin blanched. Evelyn's face drained, color leaving her cheeks in a slow wash. Her chin lifted anyway, stubborn even in the face of her own words. The video ended. The room didn't exhale. Mr. Harrison clicked the next file. This one was shorter, brighter, the audio harsher, laughing too loud for a sacred place. Miranda's voice floated from the speakers, excited. "This is going to get so many views." Gregory's voice followed, smug and cruel. Comedy gold. The footage showed a coffin, a chapel, a woman standing still, phones up, laughter in the air like smoke. A low murmur rolled through the courtroom, and this time it wasn't curiosity. It was disgust. Miranda's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened in panic, not remorse. She looked around as if searching for someone to blame for her own voice. The judge's gavel hit once, harder than before. Order. Mr. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the evidence speak in the only language the Ashfords had never respected. Permanent. "These recordings demonstrate motive," he said. "This suit is not about legitimacy. It's about control." Whitmore stood, jaw tight. The smoothness was gone from his face now, replaced by calculation. He glanced at Evelyn, then at the judge, then at the screen as if searching for an exit in the pixels. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes on the documents, on the sealed bag, on the faces at both tables. She looked at Evelyn. "Do you dispute the authenticity of these recordings?" Evelyn's lips parted. No sound came out at first. Her throat worked. Her hands gripped the table edge like it might float. Whitmore's voice came in quickly. "Your Honor, we request a recess to consult." "Denied," the judge said, flat as stone. "You filed. You claimed fraud. You will stand in the light you asked for." Nuria sat perfectly still. Her heartbeat was steady now, not because she felt nothing, but because she had already survived the worst part, being powerless in a room full of people who laughed. Now, the room was laughing at someone else, and the projector's hum filled the silence like a countdown that could not be stopped. The judge didn't rush the ending. She let the last frame fade to black, and the projector fan keep humming, like the room needed time to feel what it had just watched. Whitmore stood at the plaintiff's table with his hands braced on the wood, knuckles tight. His eyes flicked once toward Evelyn, then toward the bench, searching for a doorway in a room that only had walls. "Your Honor," he began, voice thinner now, "the plaintiff maintains that—" "Sit," Judge Brennan said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The gavel didn't even move. The word landed like a lock, clicking shut. Whitmore's jaw tightened. He sat. Judge Brennan turned her gaze to the clerk. "Mark those recordings admitted," she said. The clerk's pen scratched across paper. A small, ordinary sound, that made everything irreversible. Mr. Harrison rose again, calm as if he were reading a weather report. He held up a single page, thin, clean, typed in tight legal language. At the bottom, a signature line. Above it, a date, a time, and an initialed witness block. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiffs have now triggered the contingency clauses outlined in the will and in their employment agreements." Evelyn lurched forward. "No," she snapped. "That's not." Judge Brennan's eyes cut to her. "One more interruption, and you will be held in contempt." Evelyn's mouth closed. Her breath came through her nose, sharp and shallow. Her fingers clenched around the table edge as if it could keep her upright. Mr. Harrison continued, "Those clauses specify immediate enforcement upon initiation of legal action. That includes forfeiture of employment-linked assets, benefits, severance, stock options, and property acquired through foundation accounts." Gregory's legs stopped bouncing. He went still, like his body finally understood. Miranda's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she wiped at her cheeks, smearing mascara in dark streaks. Caleb stared straight ahead, as if he were watching his own life be erased letter by letter. Judge Brennan lifted her gaze over the rim of her glasses. "I have reviewed the documentation," she said. "The corporate filings are valid. The trusts are valid. The will is valid." Whitmore opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. He looked, for the first time, like a man who had built a career on loopholes and just met something built without them. The plaintiff's case. For a heartbeat, the courtroom didn't react. It was as if everyone needed a second to translate the sentence into consequences. Then the room erupted, reporters whispering and moving, pens scratching, camera shutters clicking like rain. Someone behind Nuria exhaled a shocked laugh. A microphone stand clinked against the floor. Judge Brennan struck the gavel once. The crack echoed off stone. "Furthermore," she said, voice colder now, "I am ordering immediate enforcement of the contingency clauses. All employment contracts under the Hail Medical Foundation subsidiaries for the named plaintiffs are terminated effective today. Any foundation-linked assets specified under those agreements are subject to forfeiture. Sanctions are imposed for filing a frivolous suit." Nose. Evelyn's face went blank, as if her mind refused to process language that didn't serve her. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her body remained upright on muscle memory alone. Caleb folded forward, elbows on knees, head dropping into his hands. His shoulders shook once, then again, small movements that looked like the start of something breaking apart. Miranda made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and covered her mouth, as if she could stop it from happening by hiding. Gregory stood too fast, chair scraping loudly. He looked around like a trapped animal. A bailiff stepped closer, hand hovering near his belt. Gregory sat back down, swallowing hard. Judge Brennan's gavel hit again. "This court is adjourned." The bailiff's voice followed. "All rise." The room surged to its feet. The courtroom became a river of bodies, sound, and heat. Reporters pushed toward the aisle, microphones raised, camera lights snapped on, bright and merciless. "Mr. Harrison leaned slightly toward Nuria. "Stay behind me," he said, quiet. Nuria stood. Her chair whispered against the floor. The movement felt clean, controlled. She gathered her folder and slid it under her arm like it weighed nothing. As she stepped into the aisle, the noise hit her full force. "Mrs. Hale, are you firing them? Did you plan this? Will you forgive your husband?" The questions collided in the air, sharp and desperate. Mr. Harrison moved like a shield, shoulders squared, guiding Nuria toward the doors. That was when Caleb's voice cut through the chaos. "Nuria." It wasn't loud, but it carried. Nuria stopped. Not because she had to, because she chose to. She turned slowly. Caleb stood near the plaintiff's table, his face pale, eyes red, jaw trembling like it couldn't decide between rage and regret. He looked smaller than he used to, like the suit had finally stopped pretending. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "Just talk to me." The courtroom noise dimmed around them, not because it stopped, but because attention shifted. Reporters smelled emotion and leaned closer. Nuria held Caleb's gaze. Her expression didn't change. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. Caleb swallowed. His hands rose, then fell again. "Useless. I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For being weak. For letting her." His voice cracked, and he looked toward Evelyn without turning his head. "For letting them destroy you." Nuria watched him for a long moment. The fluorescent lights above made his skin look washed out, almost sick. "You're right," she said quietly. "You were weak." Caleb flinched as if she'd struck him. "I was," he whispered. "I know. I don't deserve anything. But please don't take everything. We can fix this. We can start over." Nuria's gaze didn't soften. It didn't harden either. It stayed steady, like a door that would not open. "Fix this," she repeated. Caleb nodded quickly, desperate. "Yes, I loved you. I still." Outside the courthouse, the air tasted like winter and exhaust. Camera lights flared white against the stone steps. Microphones pushed forward in a hungry cluster. Foam tips, almost brushing Nuria's sleeve. Questions came from every direction, overlapping until they stopped sounding like words. Mr. Harrison lifted an arm to block the crush, but Nuria raised a hand once small, controlled, and the movement quieted the front row, the way a judge's gavel does. She stood at the top step, shoulders square, face calm. The wind tugged lightly at her hair. Down the street, a police siren rose and faded, indifferent to anyone's downfall. A reporter called out, "What happens to the Ashfords now?" Nuria let the silence stretch, just long enough to make the cameras hold steady. "My mother built something quietly," she said. Her voice didn't strain. It carried without effort. She built it while people walked past her and never learned her name. Flash, flash. A shutter clicked, like teeth. "And she built it," Nuria continued, "because she didn't want her daughter to live at the mercy of cruelty." Another reporter shouted, "Is this revenge?" Nuria's eyes stayed level. "This is consequence," she said. "There's a difference." The crowd leaned in. Even the people on the far edge lifted their phones higher. Nuria turned slightly toward the camera line, letting the lenses find her face. "I won't be giving interviews about private pain," she said, "but I will say this. If you build your life on someone else's humiliation, you shouldn't be surprised when it collapses." She stepped down, and the questions surged again. Mr. Harrison guided her to the waiting car. The door shut with a clean click, cutting the noise into muffled vibration. Inside, the leather seat was cool against her back. The city slid by outside the window, sunlight catching on glass towers. A notification storm lit her phone screen without being touched. Nuria didn't open any of it. Mr. Harrison's voice softened, just a shade. "You handled that well." Nuria watched her reflection in the tinted window, eyes steady, mouth still. "I don't feel anything," she said. "That's not nothing," Mr. Harrison replied. The car crossed an intersection. A pedestrian signal beeped, rhythmic and sharp. When they reached the foundation, the lobby screens were already running, breaking updates. A ticker line moved under Nuria's blurred photo. Employees pretended not to stare, but the air had changed. Less curiosity, more respect. The badge reader beeped as she passed through security. The elevator dinged. The doors closed. The hum rose again, steady as a heartbeat. Upstairs, her office was quiet. Sun spilling across the floor in clean rectangles. The skyline looked the same as it always had. Sharp, bright, uncaring. The only difference was what she owned inside it. Mr. Harrison set a folder on her desk. Implementation, he said. Clean removal. No chaos. Nuria opened it. Pages of procedural steps, signatures, dates, lines of authority. The language was neutral, almost kind. It made cruelty look smaller. She turned to the final page. A name change form sat at the bottom, waiting. Ashford Corporation. Renamed. Helena Hail Medical Group. Her throat tightened at the sight of her mother's name typed so plainly, without apology. Nuria signed. The pen moved smoothly, ink dark and sure. Mr. Harrison stamped the paper. The stamp hit with a blunt thump final. Official. Loud in the silence. A soft vibration buzzed against the desk. Another call. Another number. Nuria let it ring out. Mr. Harrison hesitated. There is one more document, he said. He slid a smaller envelope across the desk. The paper was thick, slightly textured. The handwriting on the front was neat and familiar. To my daughter. When the storm has passed. Nuria's fingers hovered over it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. She broke the seal carefully, as if the sound might wake something. The letter inside was handwritten. Ink slightly faded, the strokes deliberate. Her mother's voice came through in the shape of words, quiet and steady without needing to be heard aloud. Nuria read once, then again. The sentences didn't demand revenge. They demanded freedom. They didn't ask her to destroy. They asked her to choose what kind of power she would become. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent. They slid down her cheeks and landed on the paper in dark spots, staining the edges. Mr. Harrison stood still, respectful, eyes lowered. Nuria folded the letter carefully, smoothing the crease with her thumb like she was pressing down a pulse. She placed it in the top drawer of her desk, beside the earlier documents that had changed her life. The drawer shut with a soft click. When she stood, she walked to the window and looked out at the city. The streets were full of strangers carrying groceries, hurrying to buses, laughing into phones. Somewhere down there, people like her mother moved through the world unseen, essential, ignored. Nuria turned back to Mr. Harrison. I want a program, she said. He nodded once. For whom? For the people everyone steps over. Nuria replied. Cleaners, cafeteria workers, street vendors, people who do the work that keeps everything running. Her voice stayed calm, but it sharpened with purpose. Business training, financial literacy, seed funding, real support, no humiliation, no hoops. Mr. Harrison's mouth softened into something close to a smile. Consider it done. Nuria picked up another sheet from the folder. A donation authorization form. She wrote a number without hesitating. She signed again. The ink dried fast. Outside her door, someone's phone pinged. A printer whirred. An elevator dinged. Life kept moving. Nuria stayed at the window a moment longer, watching sunlight shift across the skyline. She didn't feel victory. She didn't feel hunger for more punishment. She felt something quieter. Enough. She turned away from the glass, walked out of her office, and let the door close gently behind her. Power doesn't shout. It builds. No, Nuria said softly. The word wasn't cruel. It was final. Caleb froze. You loved comfort, she continued, voice low enough that only he could truly hear it. You loved being able to stay silent and still be forgiven. You stood there while my life was treated like entertainment. And now that you've lost the world you thought was yours, you want a version of me that makes you feel less guilty. Caleb's eyes filled. Tears slipped down his face in a steady line. What do you want from me? He whispered. Tell me. Nuria stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume clean, subtle, expensive, in the quietest way. I want you to feel it, she said, voice barely above a breath. Powerless, unprotected, alone in a room full of people who think you're nothing. Caleb's breath hitched. He looked like he might fall. Nuria held his gaze for one last beat, then turned away. Mr. Harrison guided her forward. The courtroom doors opened, and light from the hallway spilled in bright and cold. Behind her, Caleb sank back into his seat, like his bones had turned to water, and Nuria walked out into the noise without looking back.